The strongest demon slayer, Yoriichi Tsugikuni, is the most important person in the entire story. And by the end of this video, you will know everything there is to know about the strongest character in Demon Slayer. You'll be able to brag to your friends about how much more Demon Slayer knowledge you have compared to them. You will learn all of Yoriichi's powers and secrets. And you will know exactly why even Demon Daddy Muzan ran away in fear from this mysterious man. By the time that Yoriichi is officially introduced in the story, he was already built up as an absolute legend. After seeing Tanjiro's Hanafuda earrings during the Asakusa arc, Muzan remembers Yoriichi standing over him after he utterly defeated him in battle. This memory triggers an intense fear within Muzan. In fact, Muzan is so afraid of Yoriichi that his very DNA has PTSD. And while Daki is fighting Tanjiro during the Entertainment District arc, she feels a crippling fear coming from Muzan's blood cells after she witnesses Tanjiro using Hinokami Kagura, which reminds Muzan's cells of Yoriichi's Breath of the Sun. But if Yoriichi is this overpowered monster who makes even Muzan shudder in fear, then why does his official introduction to the story show him in a state of depression? Why does he tell his friend Sumiyoshi that he is worthless, a man without value, and a man who failed to accomplish the one thing that he was meant to do in this life? In order to understand this strange situation, we have to go back to the beginning. Actually, scratch that. We have to go about 480 years before the beginning of the main Demon Slayer story. If you guys enjoy our Demon Slayer videos and you want to see more in the future, leave a quick like and comment right now to help us with that YouTube algorithm. And if you are one of the over 50% of people who watch our videos but haven't taken the time to subscribe yet, do me a big favor and make this the video that you subscribe and hit that notification bell to turn on all notifications. Subscribing on YouTube is completely free, but it helps me out a lot. Finally, this video will contain Demon Slayer manga spoilers. We are looking at all the available information about Yoriichi, so please proceed with caution. You have been warned. Yoriichi Tsugikuni was born nearly 5 centuries ago, during the Sengoku period of Japanese history. The Sengoku period is also known as the Warring States period because it was full of civil wars and social unrest. It was a very dangerous time. It was a very unstable time, and it was a time before science, a time of myth and superstition. Yoriichi was born into an important samurai family as the younger of 2 twin boys. Being born a twin was already considered a bad omen during this superstitious time because twins are essentially the same age, and this could lead to a power struggle when it comes time for one of the 2 sons to inherit the wealth and status of the family. During an unstable time like the Sengoku period, disputes over which son will succeed the current head of an important family could lead to a bloody civil war. And so the father of Yoriichi and Michikatsu, which was the name of the older twin brother, decided that eliminating Yoriichi may be the best thing to do. The fact that Yoriichi was born with a large and unusual birthmark on his face only amplified the superstitious fears of his father. And so, little Yoriichi came very close to losing his life when he was still just a baby. Thankfully, Yoriichi's mother was a strong, brave, and stubborn woman, and she refused to allow her husband to harm Yoriichi. She became so aggressive and angry at the mere mention of such a thing that her husband had no choice but to spare Yoriichi's life. The family agreed that instead of killing Yoriichi, they would simply ship him off to a religious temple when he reached the age of 10. When he becomes a monk at the age of 10, Yoriichi will be required to renounce his worldly possessions anyway, and so he will renounce any claims that he might have to his family's status and property. This would then leave Michikatsu, the older brother, as the only legitimate heir. And since it was decided right then and there that Michikatsu would one day take over as the head of the family while Yoriichi would leave the family and go off to live in a temple, the 2 twin boys were raised completely differently. Michikatsu was raised to become the successor, and he got the best education, the best clothes, the best food, and the best living quarters. But Yoriichi, who would only be with the family for a few years before renouncing all his earthly possessions to become a monk, was raised in accommodations more akin to that of a servant than a member of the family. He had a small room that was separated from the rest of the house, His clothes were simple, his food was basic, and his education was almost non-existent. And so while Michikatsu trained to become a samurai like his father, Yoriichi spent most of his time with his mother, and he was often clinging to her left side like some kind of baby. Michikatsu saw this as a sign that Yoriichi was weak and cowardly, and he pitied his younger brother. But he didn't dislike his younger brother. On the contrary, he would take risks just to go out and see his brother and play with him. Their father didn't want Michikatsu getting attached to Yoriichi, but Michikatsu snuck off to visit Yoriichi's room behind his father's back. And because he couldn't give any of his own belongings to Yoriichi since their father would notice and get mad, Michikatsu carved a wooden flute for Yoriichi and gave it to him as a gift. Actually, Michikatsu secretly made that flute the day after his father hit him across the face for attempting to give a different gift to Yoriichi. Yoriichi didn't speak or smile until the age of 7, leading most people to conclude that he must be deaf and perhaps also mentally deficient in some way. His mother was very concerned about him, so she made him a pair of Hanafuda earrings as good luck charms. But one day when the twins were 7 years of age, the fact that Yoriichi wasn't deaf or deficient in any way became extremely clear to Michikatsu and to everyone else in the entire household. On this particular day, the older brother Michikatsu was engaged in sword practice with a professional instructor. Yoriichi suddenly asked his brother if his dream was to become the strongest samurai in the nation. And Michikatsu was so surprised to hear his brother speak that he dropped his wooden practice sword, also known as a boken. To his brother's further surprise, Yoriichi then said that he also wanted to become a samurai. Michikatsu knew that this was impossible because Yoriichi would be shipped off to a temple when he turned 10. But even if that weren't the case, Michikatsu felt that his brother simply wasn't cut out to be a samurai. He was a meek and quiet boy who always clung to his mother's side, and mama's boys are not exactly samurai material. By this time, Michikatsu had developed a clear impression of his younger brother, and even though he cared for his brother, he believed him to be a weak boy who depends on his mommy for everything. On the other hand, Michikatsu saw himself as the true heir to his father, the boy who was training to be a manly samurai warrior. Unfortunately for Michikatsu, his preconceived notions about himself and his brother would soon be shattered. Yoriichi started hanging out with Michikatsu whenever he was practicing sword fighting. Their father's vassal, who was an expert swordsman, was serving as Michikatsu's swordsmanship instructor. Seeing that Yoriichi was clearly really interested in swordsmanship, the instructor taught him a few basic things, like how to hold the sword, how to position yourself, and how to swing. The instructor then assumed a combat stance and invited Yoriichi to try and hit him. Now, by this point in time, the 7-year-old Michikatsu still wasn't able to land a single hit on his instructor, no matter how hard he tried. And the instructor probably expected to see a similar level of skill from Yoriichi. Realistically, Yoriichi should have been even less skilled since he had received far less training than his brother. But once Yoriichi moved to strike his instructor, all of the expectations that both Michikatsu and the instructor had went right out the window. In the blink of an eye, Yoriichi was able to land 4 separate blows on his instructor. Yoriichi hit him so effectively that the instructor lost consciousness, and when he woke up he had fist-sized lumps all over his body, although thankfully no bones were broken and no vital organs were injured. In this moment, Yoriichi revealed the truth, that he was an unrivaled natural talent, someone who was born to be the ultimate swordsman. The tough and committed training of someone like Michikatsu would never be able to compare to the raw natural talent of someone like Yoriichi. But surprisingly, realizing that he had an incredible natural gift for swordsmanship didn't convince Yoriichi to keep pursuing the goal of becoming a samurai. On the contrary, Yoriichi hated the feeling of hitting someone and hurting them with a sword, and so he gave up on the idea entirely. If you become a samurai, hurting people just comes with the territory, especially during the Sengoku period, and Yoriichi wasn't interested in that kind of life. And yet, even after Yoriichi decided that he no longer wanted to become a samurai, Michikatsu kept questioning him about the secret of his strength. He wanted to know how Yoriichi managed to get so powerful without any formal training, and he wanted to learn from his brother so that he could become as strong as he was. Eventually, Yoriichi explained that before your opponent attacks, his lungs heave. You just need to look closely at the disposition of his bones, the contraction of his muscles, and the flow of his blood. This will allow you to predict your opponent's movements and strike them in exactly the right place at exactly the right time. Yoriichi didn't realize it yet, but not only was he born with a birthmark that we now know is the Demon Slayer mark, but he was also born with the ability to see the transparent world, and he was already using it to his advantage as a 7-year-old. On top of the power to see through people's bodies, Yoriichi also had incredible physical abilities that were simply leagues above anything that a normal 7-year-old would possess, including Michikatsu. Michikatsu then realized that all this time he had pitied his brother and he had seen himself as superior to Yoriichi. In reality, Yoriichi was far superior to him, and what's worse, being superior came effortlessly to Yoriichi. Even though Michikatsu was a talented swordsman who worked hard and suffered greatly to get better and stronger, his progress was like that of a turtle compared to Yoriichi's. Michikatsu had immense admiration for his brother's talent, and he wondered how amazing it must be to be so blessed in the art of the sword. But despite all that, Yoriichi wasn't even interested in swordsmanship anymore. Whenever his brother talked about sword fighting, Yoriichi seemed bored, and he was much more interested in playing board games or flying a kite than he was in talking about swords. This upset Michikatsu because here he was working his entire short life to improve his swordsmanship and become a great samurai, and yet his brother had unbelievable natural talent for sword fighting, but he didn't even care about swords. It's like he was just squandering the kind of gift that Michikatsu would kill for. To make the whole thing even worse, after their father heard that Yoriichi had practically superhuman talent, he decided that Yoriichi should become his successor, and not Michikatsu. Suddenly, Yoriichi would be the one sleeping in the big fancy rooms and wearing the nice fancy clothes, and Michikatsu would be shipped off to the temple when he turned 10. Even though Michikatsu wanted to become a samurai and Yoriichi did not, Michikatsu's dream would be denied and Yoriichi would get everything that he had been promised. Or at least that's how things seemed for a while. Nevertheless, Yoriichi preempted this. One night when Michikatsu was lying in bed, Yoriichi appeared and told him that their mother had died. Michikatsu was shocked because he didn't even think there was anything wrong with their mother, but Yoriichi simply told him to ask their mother's servant for the details. Yoriichi could not give him the details himself because he had to leave for the temple right now. Yoriichi knew that if he didn't leave, his father would send Michikatsu off to the temple, and this would prevent his older brother from achieving his dream of becoming a samurai. And with their mother now gone, there would be no one there to stand up to their father. The only option now was for Yoriichi to disappear, and then their father would have no choice but to accept Michikatsu as his successor, because he would be the only successor left. Before leaving, Yoriichi said a heartfelt goodbye to his brother, and he showed Michikatsu the wooden flute that Michikatsu had carved for him earlier. Yoriichi said that he thinks of this flute as his brother, and he will cherish it always and keep it close to his heart. Michikatsu felt that the flute was a piece of junk that couldn't even play on pitch, and seeing Yoriichi wrap it in cloth and guard it as if it was some kind of treasure was a surprising sight for him to see. He didn't seem to understand why his brother felt such an affection for him, and why that stupid flute held so much meaning. Yoriichi then bowed deeply and walked off into the night, taking barely anything with him. Michikatsu would later find his mother's journal, and the journal confirmed that Yoriichi left for the temple early in order to prevent their father from making him the heir instead of Michikatsu. Yoriichi also knew that their mother was ill and approaching death for years. Meanwhile, Michikatsu had no idea. Their mother's illness gave her pain on her left side in particular, and so when Yoriichi had been clinging to the left side of her body, he wasn't doing it because he was a mama's boy who clung to his mother, he was doing it to help and support her. This revelation in particular seemed to break something inside of Michikatsu, and he began to burn with jealousy towards his brother. Yoriichi was not only blessed and talented in ways that Michikatsu couldn't even imagine, but he was also such a kind and caring soul. He was practically perfect, and no person could ever compete with such perfection. Michikatsu began wishing that his younger brother would simply die because his perfect existence seemed to defy the very laws of nature. Yoriichi was of course right. His father did want him to replace Michikatsu as his successor, and he sent men to track Yoriichi down at the temple that he was supposed to go to and to bring him back. But when they arrived at the temple, Yoriichi wasn't there. He disappeared and no one could find him. To some extent, you can understand where the father is coming from. The Sengoku period was extremely harsh, and having someone as strong and talented as Yoriichi at the head of your family could ensure the entire clan's survival, while leaving the family in the hands of a less capable person could lead to the destruction of the entire clan. But once Yoriichi disappeared and no one could find him, their father didn't have a choice, and Michikatsu became the designated successor once again. Yoriichi couldn't be found at the temple because he never went there. Upon leaving his childhood home, he began to run at full speed, and he didn't stop running for an entire day and an entire night. He eventually ended up in the mountains, and despite the fact that he had run for so many hours at full speed without resting, he didn't feel exhausted. This once again speaks to Yoriichi's phenomenal natural abilities, which are far beyond the abilities of an actual human. When he finally stopped running, Yoriichi found himself in front of a small rice paddy. He saw a girl that was about his age, and she was just standing there with a bucket, all alone. She didn't speak, so Yoriichi asked what she was doing there. The girl replied that her entire family died of plague, and she was left all alone. Being all the way up here in the mountains, she feels very lonely, so she comes to this place to find tadpoles to take home. But then, as the sun began to set, the girl freed the tadpoles from her bucket. When Yoriichi asked why she isn't going to take them home, the girl said that she felt bad about separating them from their families. Yoriichi felt sympathy and compassion for this lonely girl, so he offered to walk her home. The girl's name was Uta, and her eyes were like obsidian. Yoriichi walked her home, and then he just decided to stay with her, and they began living together. Yoriichi was never much of a talker. As we know, he didn't even say a single word until the age of 7. But Uta was just the opposite, and she loved to talk. She would talk from morning to night, and it was through talking with Uta and through listening to her talk all the time that Yoriichi learned that people see the world differently than he does. Other people don't have the ability to see through living bodies as if they were transparent, something that Yoriichi was born with, and so he assumed that it was just normal for everyone. Yoriichi realized that he was very different from most people, and that is why he never fit in with others. He felt like a kite whose string had been broken, but Uta was able to keep him grounded by holding onto his hand firmly. They lived together for 10 years, and then they got married. Soon after that, Uta got pregnant, and when it was almost time for her to give birth, Yoriichi left the house to find a midwife. He had planned to return before sunset, but along the way he found an old man who was rushing to visit his dying son. The man had a bad heart, and there was no way that he would have made it in time to say goodbye to his son, who had been fatally injured in battle. Yoriichi decided to help the old man, and he was able to bring him to his son in time, but he lost many hours because of it, and he had to postpone summoning a midwife until the following day. He rushed home, but it was too late. He arrived after sunset, and while he was away, Uta and his unborn child were tragically murdered by a demon. If Yoriichi had returned before sunset as he had promised, he would have been there when the demon arrived, since demons operate at night. But because Yoriichi was such a caring person who wanted to help that unfortunate old man, he failed to protect his own wife and child, the people he loved the most in this world. For 10 whole days, Yoriichi was beside himself, as if in a daze. He cradled the bodies of his family and he wouldn't let go. Finally, a demon slayer who had been pursuing a demon in the area stumbled upon the house and found Yoriichi there. This demon slayer had the same hair color as the Rengoku family, so we can conclude that this demon slayer was the ancestor of the flame Hashira Kyojuro Rengoku. the Demon Slayer was finally able to convince Yoriichi to give the bodies a proper burial. Despite his immense natural talents, Yoriichi didn't want a lot from life. He wasn't ambitious or power-hungry or trying to prove himself to anyone. His dream was to live a simple and quiet life with his family in a house that was so small that they could all sleep side by side and see each other all day long. That would have been enough for Yoriichi. But even that humble dream couldn't come true because demons exist in this world. So Yoriichi decided to become a demon slayer. The demon slayers have been around as long as the demons themselves. But before Yoriichi, demon slayers didn't use breathing styles to fight, and as a result, they were far weaker. Yoriichi was the user of the original breathing style, the breath of the sun, and this is something that came naturally to him as a result of his incredible talents and abilities. Yoriichi taught breathing styles to the strongest demon slayers, known as the Hashira, and this made them much more powerful than they were before. No other demon slayer was ever able to master the breath of the sun itself, it was too advanced for them, but Yoriichi was able to adapt the breathing styles of each individual slayer to their own strengths and abilities. And that is how the first derivative breathing styles emerged, including flame, wind, water, thunder, and stone breathing. Suddenly, these superhuman demons were being defeated one after the other, and eventually even Yoriichi's older brother Michikatsu became a demon slayer. For the 10 years that Yoriichi spent living with Uta, Michikatsu had lived peacefully at the family home. He married and had 2 children, and his days were calm and even somewhat boring. Time went by slowly, and he had practically forgotten about his younger brother, and he almost forgot the extreme jealousy that he had felt because of his brother's natural talents. But then one night, a demon attacked the place where Michikatsu and some of his men had set up camp. And before long, all of Michikatsu's men were dead and he was the only one left standing. Michikatsu would have met the same fate as his men, but Demon Slayer Yoriichi arrived just in time to relieve the demon of his head and save his older brother. Immediately, Michikatsu's tranquility was gone and his stomach once again burnt with jealousy and even hate. In a mere flash, Yoriichi demonstrated unbelievable skills with the sword. Skills that made even the phenomenal talent he showed as a child seem insignificant by comparison. Yoriichi could now easily defeat superhuman opponents like demons, opponents who were able to kill dozens of samurai warriors on their own. To make things worse, after saving Michikatsu's life, Yoriichi actually apologized. He apologized for not arriving sooner and saving all of Michikatsu's men along with him. Yoriichi was not only a flawless swordsman, but he was also a man of flawless character. And Michikatsu was reminded yet again just how inferior he was compared to his younger brother. And even though he knew that Yoriichi was far superior to him, Michikatsu couldn't help wanting to reach the same heights as his brother. He even abandoned his wife and children in order to become a demon slayer just like Yoriichi, and in order to train with Yoriichi in the hopes of one day becoming as strong as he was. And so Yoriichi trained Michikatsu along with the other demon slayers, and even though Michikatsu could never perfect the breath of the sun, he eventually developed the derivative form known as moon breathing. He also manifested the demon slayer mark, along with several other demon slayers who had trained under Yoriichi. And yet, even after learning a breathing style and manifesting a mark identical to Yoriichi's, Michikatsu still couldn't catch up to his younger brother. He was much stronger than before, but still nowhere near Yoriichi. But then, those demon slayers who manifested the mark began to die off at the age of 25. It seems that the mark gave demon slayers additional power, but that power came at the cost of their lifespan. Michikatsu had to face the hard truth. He was about to die without ever catching up to his brother. His burning, all-consuming jealousy would never go away because he would die as he had lived in his brother's shadow. And it was in this moment of self-doubt and desperation that Michikatsu was approached by the progenitor of all demons, Muzan Kibutsuji. Muzan told Michikatsu that if he became a demon, he could live forever. He would have all the time in the world to get stronger and surpass his brother, and the jealousy he felt would finally go away. His lifelong goal of catching up to Yoriichi would finally be attainable, and at long last he would be able to step out of his brother's shadow. Staring in the face of his own imminent death and facing the prospect of ending his life as a failure, Michikatsu agreed to Muzan's proposal. He became the demon Kokushibo. But if Muzan thought that he was now safe because he was able to recruit a demon slayer who used breathing styles into his demon ranks, he was wrong. Soon after, he would come face to face with none other than Yoriichi. As soon as Yoriichi laid eyes on Muzan, he knew that he had been born for one reason and one reason only: to defeat the progenitor of the demon race. Yoriichi could feel right away that Muzan was overflowing with violent intent. Looking at him felt like looking at the magma that erupted from a volcano. He boiled and seethed as if to consume everything. Cocky as always, Muzan told Yoriichi that he was no longer interested in swordsmen who used breathing styles, and this was likely an allusion to the fact that Muzan had already convinced one demon slayer who used breathing, Michikatsu, to become a demon. He obviously had no idea that Yoriichi was on a completely different level from his brother, and from everyone else. But although Muzan was too cocky, he certainly wasn't someone to take lightly. In fact, this moment was the very first time that Yoriichi felt a chill down his spine. Because by looking at Muzan's movements, he knew that even a single scratch from Muzan could kill him. So Yoriichi dodged Muzan's attacks as best as he could while preparing for his own attack. Using his ability to see the transparent world, Yoriichi saw that Muzan had 7 hearts and 5 brains distributed throughout his body, meaning that even the act of taking off Muzan's head would not necessarily kill him. Yoriichi's only hope was a single decisive attack that involved perfecting, or rather completing, all of the forms of sun breathing. By rapidly and continuously performing all 12 forms of sun breathing, the user is able to destroy all 12 of Muzan's vital organs, 7 hearts, and 5 brains. This is what is referred to as the 13th form of sun breathing, the completion and perfect union of all 12 forms into one. Yoriichi's phenomenal attack caught Muzan by surprise, and he was cut down and utterly defeated. He tried to regenerate, but his body wouldn't obey, because Yoriichi was in possession of a bright red Nichirin sword, and bright red Nichirin swords disrupt the regeneration abilities of demons. Yoriichi looked down on the defeated demon, who was laying on the ground in shock, and he asked, "What is the value of a life to you?" Muzan didn't answer. His face just turned a dark shade of red, and it looked like he was about to explode with rage. Yoriichi then glanced over to a female demon who had been standing next to Muzan when the battle first began. Yoriichi thought that this female demon might try to help Muzan, so he was prepared to fight her too. But to his surprise, the girl didn't try to help. She simply stood there and stared at Muzan's mangled body, as if hoping that he would actually be destroyed right here and now. Yoriichi determined that the girl wasn't a threat, so he prepared to finish off Muzan for good. But as Yoriichi stepped towards the demon, he heard the sound of Muzan's teeth grinding. Muzan was about to use the very last trick up his sleeve, his final desperate attempt to survive this encounter with the strongest demon slayer. Muzan made his own body explode into 1,800 pieces and disperse all over the forest. Yoriichi reacted quickly, and he was able to cut down more than 1,500 of those 1,800 pieces of flesh, but the rest were too small and they managed to squirm away. Once they got away from Yoriichi, these pieces combined into a lump the size of a human head, and so Muzan managed to survive and eventually to regenerate. The female demon dropped down to her knees and began to weep. Yoriichi was so close to destroying Muzan, which is exactly what she had been hoping for, but Muzan was able to overcome even the act of being beheaded, and he somehow managed to continue living yet again. The girl was beyond distraught. She was crying and pulling out her hair in frustration. Despite being a demon, she hated Muzan as much as anyone. This female demon fully expected to die now because she had so clearly disobeyed Muzan, but for some reason nothing happened to her. Perhaps Muzan was too weak now to try and hurt her or control her. When she calmed down a bit, she told Yoriichi that Muzan will probably never face Yoriichi again. He almost died and he will now be terrified, so he will hide out and wait for Yoriichi to die a natural death before re-emerging. Being immortal, Muzan has all the time in the world to wait it out, but Yoriichi doesn't. Sooner or later, he will die. Since the female demon was free from Muzan's control, Yoriichi asked her to help him find and defeat the demon progenitor once and for all. She agreed, and she revealed that her name is Tamayo. This is the same Tamayo that is still alive and working to defeat Muzan to this day. It was only after this confrontation with Muzan that Yoriichi learned from his fellow demon slayers that his own brother Michikatsu decided to become a demon. Despite being the strongest demon slayer, Yoriichi failed to defeat Muzan. He allowed Tamayo to escape unharmed even though she was a demon, and his own twin brother betrayed the demon slayers and willingly became a demon. As a result of these failures, Yoriichi was banished from the demon slayer corps. Some demon slayers even suggested that he should take his own life in order to atone for his failures, but the young leader of the Ubuyashiki family and of the demon slayer corps at the time would not allow it. Yoriichi truly felt that he was born with this exceptional strength, skill, and talent for the sole purpose of defeating Muzan. But now that Muzan was hiding from him, he felt that he had failed in the very task that he had been born to do. That is why Yoriichi is so depressed during his first official introduction in chapter 99. And that is why he calls himself a man without value, who failed to accomplish the one thing that he was meant to do in this life. That is why he calls himself worthless. Thankfully, Yoriichi's friend Sumiyoshi, his wife Suyako, and their young children were able to be there for Yoriichi and to cheer him up when he needed it the most. He eventually told Sumiyoshi his entire life story, and he taught him how to perform all of the forms of sun breathing, which would then be passed on from generation to generation within Sumiyoshi's family as the dance of the fire god, Hinokami Kagura. Yoriichi visited his friend Sumiyoshi several times, and on his last visit he gifted Sumiyoshi the Hanafura earrings that his mother had made for him as a child. These earrings would also be passed down through the generations along with the Hinokami Kagura until they finally made their way to Tanjiro himself. On the day that Yoriichi left Sumiyoshi and his family for the final time, Tanjiro's ancestor told Yoriichi that he saved their lives, and he promised to carry on his legacy through the future generations of their family. Sumiyoshi told Yoriichi that his life is not without value, and that he won't let anyone say that about him. Yoriichi smiled and thanked Sumiyoshi and his family, and then he waved and disappeared forever. But even though he was banished from the demon slayers, Yoriichi continued to fight against demons on his own for the better part of the next 60 years. Even though he was born with the demon slayer mark, Yoriichi didn't die at the age of 25. Instead, he lived well into his 80s, and eventually he would come face to face with his own demon brother Michikatsu, now known as the Upper Moon One, Kokushibo. The fact that Yoriichi was still alive despite having the Demon Slayer mark again emphasized the fact that Yoriichi was special and more gifted than his brother. Now a demon, Kokushibo of course didn't age, and he was still at peak strength when he met his brother for the final time. Meanwhile, Yoriichi was now a frail old man who inhabited a weak human body rather than an immortal demon body. And yet, Yoriichi pitied what his twin brother had become. Michikatsu thought that Yoriichi was now just an ugly and frail old creature. And yet, Yoriichi actually cried and expressed pity and sympathy for Michikatsu. Yoriichi was the one who pitied Michikatsu, not the other way around. However, in the next moment, Yoriichi's sympathy and sentimentality ceased. He assumed his battle stance, and a heavy aura of intimidation filled the air. There were no flaws or openings in Yoriichi's stance, and he even announced to Kokushibo when he would attack. But Kokushibo still couldn't stop it. Yoriichi's form was still flawless, his sun breathing was still godlike, and even after 6 decades, Yoriichi was still stronger than Kokushibo. His technique was so incredible that he defeated the demon Kokushibo despite being an octogenarian. Kokushibo was severely injured by the elderly Yoriichi's attack, and he knew that with the very next attack, Yoriichi would cut him down and end his life forever. Nevertheless, Yoriichi passed away from old age before he had a chance to strike the finishing blow against Kokushibo. Now well into his 80s, Yoriichi died of natural causes, but he died standing. He died on his feet. Kokushibo survived the battle, but he was forced to live another 400 years with the knowledge that even as an old man, Yoriichi was still stronger than him. To make things even worse, when Kokushibo angrily cut down Yoriichi's lifeless body, he found the small wooden flute that he had made for his brother back when they were children. Despite the fact that Kokushibo had betrayed the Demon Slayer Corps, and despite the fact that he became a ruthless demon, Yoriichi still treasured that defective little flute that his twin brother had made for him all those years ago. So not only was Yoriichi stronger than Kokushibo, even in his 80s, but he still remained a man of flawless character and endless compassion until the very end. Yoriichi was always able to see the beauty of this world, in spite of all its flaws and cruelties. Even after he lost his family at the hands of a demon, even after he lost his brother to treachery, even after he failed to destroy Muzan and was banished from the Demon Slayer Corps, Yoriichi was still able to see beauty in this world. He saw it in Sumiyoshi and his family, in the innocent embrace of Sumiyoshi's daughter, and in the smiles on the faces of the people he helped. Yoriichi always remained faithful to his principles, and he fought against the demons for nearly 80 years. He was never tempted to become a demon himself, and he never compromised his own dignity and integrity. He still cherished the memory of his brother, even though that brother turned his back on everything, even his own humanity, and became a cruel and ruthless villain, unrecognizable, inhuman monster. Referring to Yoriichi, Muzan famously said, "The real monster is that man, not me." And in some ways, Muzan isn't exactly wrong. Humans are flawed and imperfect, and they are often scared and angry and hypocritical. In that sense, Muzan, the progenitor of the demons, is far more human than Yoriichi. Muzan acted like he was a superior being, but he was also terrified of death at the same time. He ran away and hid from Yoriichi rather than face him again, and he was willing to destroy everyone and everything in his path just so he would one day be free from his crippling fear of death. But Yoriichi's character is almost divine. Not only did he have superhuman strength and talent, but he had a flawless moral character and a heart full of kindness and compassion. No amount of evil or tragedy could ever take that kindness and compassion out of Yoriichi, and nothing could prevent him from seeing the beauty of this world. Beauty that is all around us. Due to his incredible God-given powers and abilities, Yoriichi's life was in many ways a miracle. But Yoriichi teaches us that all life is a miracle, and that we are all so lucky to have been born into this world. We cannot forget that without Yoriichi, Muzan and the demons would never have been defeated. Sumiyoshi would have died, Tanjiro never would have been born, and breathing styles would not have been a thing. Without Yoriichi, no Demon Slayer would have ever learned to use breathing techniques, and so they would have been far less effective against the demons in battle. Frankly, it's likely that the Demon Slayer Corps would have gone extinct long before the Taisho period even began. Finally, Tamayo never would have been able to break free of Muzan's control and eventually contribute to his ultimate downfall if it wasn't for Yoriichi. Yoriichi was certainly the strongest Demon Slayer in history, but in many ways, he is also the most important character in all of Demon Slayer. Because without Yoriichi Tsugikuni, this story that we know and love would not have been possible. If you liked this video on Yoriichi and his backstory, then don't miss my video on the backstory of every known Hashira in Demon Slayer, link in the description and on screen. If you guys enjoyed this Demon Slayer video and you want to see more in the future, leave a quick like and comment right now. And if you enjoyed the video but you haven't taken the time to subscribe to the channel yet, do me a big favor and subscribe right now and hit that notification bell to turn on all notifications.